Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. This week is kind of like a live recorded podcast episode with the amazing Lily Sutter Nutrition. She does so much cool stuff on social media, and I get asked questions about running nutrition all the time on Instagram and on here. And obviously, while I can share my own personal experience, nothing quite beats the voice of an actual expert in the field. There's so much misinformation on the internet, and there's no replacement to actually going to the source of evidence-based information. And in that case, that is Lily. Lily is a Harley Street nutritionist and a keen runner as well. She's currently co-training with her boyfriend for London Marathon. She's not actually going to run the marathon, but he is running the marathon and she's also doing the training, which I think is actually kind of badass, because when it comes to running the marathon, the training is kind of one of the hardest bits, and the marathon itself is like where you get your time to shine, and she's not even doing that bit. So I think that's pretty cool. But because she's a runner as well, she knows loads about the importance of fueling for runs, and I think you guys are gonna absolutely love this conversation. So stay tuned, ask your questions below. We will do our best to answer them once this is live. Hi Lily, how are you doing?
All good, thanks for having me on to this session.
That is okay. I'm loving your Zoom background. You've clearly curated it very nicely.
Thank you.
So we're going to go straight into the questions, because I've done plenty of rambling on just before this. And so one of the most common questions I get asked is what to eat kind of before a run and when to eat it.
Yeah, I think, as a nutritionist, that is one of the main questions I get asked about running performance. And when we're looking at fueling our runs, it is super important to look at that sort of pre-run meal. Carbohydrates are one of the key kind of macros that help to fuel our runs. They're our main primary source of energy. They basically break down to glucose, which is what our body basically runs off. So when it comes to pre-fueling your run, part of this is what can you tolerate, because everybody can tolerate different types of meals. Some people can tolerate slightly larger meals and be absolutely fine, whereas others feel quite sick and it can cause digestive upset. So as a general rule of thumb, if you've got sort of 2 to 4 hours before you run, ideally have a balanced meal. As I was saying, get in some carbs in there. For those who want a little bit more detail, it's roughly your body weight in kilograms. That's roughly how many grams of carbs. But it's a rough idea. And with those carbs, ideally they'd be slow release carbs, getting a bit of protein, a bit of healthy fats, and anything which provides you with sustained fuel. So it could be a bowl of porridge with some milk, some nut butter, could be eggs on toast, I don't know, like a jacket potato with tuna and avo. If you've got a very short period of time before your run and you've got sort of less than 2 hours, or you've got just an hour, something more fast release. You don't want anything heavy sitting in your stomach, causing cramps. So something which is kind of the opposite of what I just said, something which is a fast release carb, low fiber or lowish fiber, not too much fat in there. So it could be a piece of fresh fruit, it could be a smoothie with a bit of low-fat yogurt and fruit, or even sort of like a granola bar.
Sure. So I think actually so many people are actually quite scared of white carbs, and we're told time and time again, obviously, to get in as much fiber as possible. But one thing that I'm starting to realize is that when it comes to running, actually quick release carbs are really the way forwards, especially if you are closer to the run and don't have so much time. So I'm frequently having bagels or crumpets or white pasta, all of that kind of stuff that I used to steer well clear of, but actually I feel like they can form quite a key and healthy part of a diet. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to sports nutrition, I guess it depends on how much depth you're going into, but funny enough, sometimes it kind of counteracts what general guidelines are. Usually we're told to have lots of whole grains, which is healthy within the diet. But yeah, when it comes to sports nutrition, the fast release carbs, like the white refined ones, definitely have a place pre, but also actually immediately post run, because they provide an instant source of fuel.
So that actually brings me on to the next question. Following on from that, post-workout nutrition, when do you need to eat after a run? Is it within the first 30 minutes? You know, you get told a lot you need to eat immediately afterwards, or kind of does it not really matter? Is there a little bit more leeway in reality?
Yes, so post-run, what the kind of main aim to do is to recover your glycogen stores. So glycogen is basically a term of stored fuel in the body. So it's stored carbohydrate in your muscle and your liver cells. So when we're refueling our glycogen, it's kind of like filling up a car with petrol. That's what you're kind of trying to do with the carbohydrates that you eat. And when we consume carbs post-exercise, they break down to sugar and they store as that glycogen. And that glycogen is going to be a primary sort of fuel source when we next run. So it's important to maximize that. Now, interestingly, immediately post-run, we are about 1.5 times more efficient at converting the carbohydrate we eat into glycogen. So we can actually store that much more efficiently. And this sort of period of time, or this time frame, is about 2 hours. So there is kind of like a 2-hour window where we're very, very efficient at storing glycogen. After that 2-hour window, our ability to store glycogen drops by about 66%. So we can certainly still be storing glycogen. It's just the rate at which we do that slows down. Now, if you are just a regular runner, you're running a couple of times a week, you don't really need to panic too much about timings and windows and all of this lot. Just have a balanced meal or a snack post-run is absolutely fine. But if you are training quite heavily and you are doing a lot of runs consecutively, so you are running daily or you've got less than kind of like an 8-hour window between runs, you know, it's super important to take advantage of this 2-hour window. Within half an hour, if you can get it within half an hour, even better. But that 2-hour window is kind of quite important. And it's difficult because not everybody feels like refueling post-run. I know I certainly don't have sort of much of an appetite post-run, but in that kind of post-run meal or snack that you have, just a quick tip of what you could do is make sure you get in the carbs and protein. And what's thought is if you have a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs and protein post-exercise, it increases your ability to store glycogen by about sort of 40%. So it could be, again, really simple kind of refuel snack like a smoothie if you struggle to consume food post-exercise. Milk, weirdly, is quite a good refuel drink because it's carbs and it's protein. It's got some electrolytes in there. I've got a good recipe on my Instagram. I did a cooking demo, and there's a really good smoothie which has got some berries and milk and oats and yogurt. And it's sort of a good ratio, 3-to-1 refuel smoothie.
And so kind of following on from talking about milks and yogurts, I know a lot of people who follow me are plant-based, and I eat a plant-based diet myself as well. A couple of questions here. Kind of what are the alternatives to dairy when it comes to refueling and also getting in your protein? And also, can you have, I mean, I'm coming at this from a slightly loaded point of view, but can you be a good athlete on a vegan or plant-based diet, and what kind of role does having plant-based nutrition play in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like with any diet, it doesn't matter what diet you kind of follow, you get well-rounded, balanced, nourishing diets, and you also get nutrient poor diets. So it doesn't matter what kind of dietary pattern you follow. So today I'm just talking about the nutrition side of veganism rather than ethical, environmental elements. But you know, with plant-based diets, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. You can absolutely still be a good athlete, a good runner following a plant-based diet. Absolutely. I think one of the elements of plant-based diets is that they are high in things like antioxidants, plant-based nutrients. They're low in saturated fats. They're a source of fiber. There's a bit of a myth around the protein side of things on plant-based diets. And as long as it's sort of a carefully planned vegan diet, you will get sufficient protein in. And there's some interesting research looking more so at veggies, but showing that they have just as good aerobic capacity as, say, meat eaters, for example. But when we're looking at protein sources, something just to bear in mind is that you have high quality and lower quality proteins. So high quality basically is a term for protein which has all the amino acids, so all these building blocks that you need for well-being, so for muscle tissue repair and recovery. recovery. And that generally comes from animal sources, but tofu, tempeh is a good plant-based source of or high quality protein source. But all you need to do is mix and match your protein sources throughout the day if you follow a vegan diet. So if you're having beans, lentils, chickpeas, nuts and seeds, you know, all of those are great protein sources, but mixing and matching your sources is a good option to get a greater array of amino acids.
Yeah, and one thing that I frequently also discuss is that is the importance of variety in any diet. I mean, you're getting, although you may not get so many complete sources of protein in a vegan diet, actually by kind of mixing and matching lots of different protein sources, you're also getting the other benefits of having a wide variety of different foods. And that's something that I talk about a lot, because if you're only eating one or two types of protein as a meat eater as well, then you're also going to be lacking in other things as well. So variety is one of the most important things that I think about when with my own diet. I do plan my diet. I think it comes more naturally to me a little bit because I haven't eaten meat since I was 4 years old. It's not been a part of my diet for a really long time. But I went vegan around 3 years ago, and I've been consciously taking more care to have my protein, eat my, you know, good carbohydrates, and then also having just a huge variety of different foods in my diet. And the great thing is that I eat a lot of food, so there's plenty of space to get variety in there as well.
Amazing. And you're right about the variety. It's good for our gut microbiota. You know, rainbow colored foods, diversity, all really important. So
think so much just about macros and the macronutrients, so carbs, fats and proteins, but actually micronutrients, as you say, are so important as well, and things like diversity of food as well.
Yeah, completely. And just from the micronutrient perspective, one micronutrient to consider with a vegan diet, which you may, I'm sure you look into yourself, but just checking your B12 levels and making sure, you know, if you're not having lots of fortified foods with B12, ensuring you're taking a supplement. We know iron is something just to be a bit mindful of as well, particularly with runners and female runners. They may, you know, if you're getting fatigued, if you're having symptoms of low iron status, it's very easy to get a blood test with your GP. But there are, as we've spoken, plenty of iron-rich sources from plant-based foods, but keeping an eye on it is important.
Yeah, and I think there sometimes can be a bit of a view that taking supplements is some sort of weakness, and I don't necessarily think that's true. You know, I take B12 supplements, I take iron supplements from time to time if I'm showing signs of like kind of going down that route of anemia or anything like that. I haven't actually been anemic since being vegan, but I was beforehand, and it was really important for me to take that up. So I don't think it's a weakness in a way to have deficiencies. You know, everyone's different. I have a meat eating friend who's really prone to anemia and she has to take iron supplements. It's just everyone's different, and everyone has to take care of their bodies in their own way.
You're absolutely right. And diet can be one of the causes, for example, of low iron status, but there are other causes as well. So you're right. It's not always nutritionally focused.
Okay, so back onto running and races, and races aren't really on at the moment, but for when they're back, what are your top tips for fueling over a long race? So whether that is a half marathon or an ultra marathon even, how do you fuel yourself for that longer distance?
So when we're looking at sort of longer distance runs and fueling your body, it is important to look at potentially taking on additional sort of sources of carbohydrates. Obviously, we want to make sure our glycogen stores are as full as we can possibly get them before a race, for example. But our glycogen will only take us so far. So that kind of store of energy takes us to about sort of roughly 90 minutes of running. Past that, you know, your status it becomes low, and it's almost like termed as hitting a wall because your levels are low, so the intensity of running that you can sustain actually reduces. So what we need to start looking at is fueling during the run if you're doing something which is longer than, say, an hour of a run. And obviously this all depends on the distance and the intensity at which you're running, but you could start looking at taking on a gel. You could start looking at a sports drinks, for example. We know that additional sources of carbohydrate, we tend to bode well with about sort of 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. Some people may tolerate ever so slightly more, but usually we tolerate about a gram of carb per minute. So a gel around, most gels have about 20 to 30 grams of carbs. You could take a gel every half an hour. What I would recommend doing is potentially, again, this really depends on the person, but starting early with your gels. So don't take it when you're completely depleted. If you're having something like that, take it super slowly, so little and often, because our bodies literally can't tolerate a huge carb load. So if you're taking it all in one sitting, you may feel really sick. And definitely practice with your fueling strategy, pre-fueling strategies as well, because if you actually get to a race and you've not practiced, you've never taken a gel before, you've never had a sports drink, you could actually have a bit of a disaster. So.
Yes, I know where this is going. That goes on to the subject of runner's gut, runner's trots, whatever you want to call it. What is the cause of that, and what can you do to help it?
Yeah, so there's several causes. It's difficult to always pinpoint one. I mean, one of these could be, for example, nerves, particularly if it's on a race day. There's a link between the gut and the brain. So our vagus nerve links the two together. And if we are super nervous, it can actually affect the gut function or the transit time of the gut. The other thing is the actual motion of running stimulates peristalsis within the gut. So what that means is kind of like gut contractions or muscle contractions, which basically moves everything along. The other sort of area that we just need to consider is when we're running, often blood flow shunts away from the digestive tract. So a lot of these sort of combinations of things could trigger digestive issues and cramping and, as you've said, runner's gut. Having a quick look at, the composition of the sort of supplements that you're taking. So if you're having gels and sports drinks, or for example, you're having very high fiber snacks just before you go on a run, it's something just to double check, because sometimes these sorts of things could exacerbate symptoms. And as I was just saying now, when you are having things like gels and sports drinks when you're running, take it slowly, because as I said, our body literally can't actually take on that much carbohydrate. It has to be slow and steady. If it's too much at once, it causes issues. And lastly, just things like, running especially higher intensity running can trigger the stress response within the body, which may exacerbate symptoms as well. So it's a whole host of things. And I think testing, trial and error, and just seeing what you can tolerate is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about training programs is not only does it train your legs and your muscles and your lungs to be able to deal with the stresses of running, but also your gut. And each training session is sort of a mini test for race day. And so, there's this whole thing, never try anything new on race day. And oh my God, you have to live by that. And I have not in the past. And thankfully, my gut can handle quite a lot because I eat so much all the time. But I do know many, many people who have been caught out by trying new things that they think are going to be incredible on race day, and their gut doesn't like it because they haven't practiced it in advance. So practicing things in advance, I think, is so important. And just giving them a go on some of your more intense runs as well. Because obviously, if you're racing, you might be going slightly faster than on your slower training runs. So if you can handle something on a training session, you should be able to handle it on the day itself. And one thing I'd add to your triggers list is coffee. Coffee obviously already speeds up things in the body. Doing it on race day, when combined with nerves, when combined with lots of water, when combined with running and food, can equal absolute disaster if you're not a little bit careful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, that's a really good point to flag.
And also, many gels also have caffeine in as well, which can be a godsend. But if you're not used to it, again, I think it can be slightly disastrous.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to the next question. We've spoken a lot about carbohydrates, and I actually have been asked quite a lot about the keto diet and the role that that might play in long distance running. I have a couple of views on it myself, but I'd love to hear from a nutritionist point of view. Does the keto diet play a role in being a good athlete or being a healthy person in general?
Yeah, so the keto diet, just for those who aren't aware of what it is, it's basically a very, very low carbohydrate diet. So it would be consuming sort of under 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. It's quite a high fat diet, moderate protein diet. And from, I guess, more of an anecdotal point of view, some people say they thrive off it, but initially it was designed, as a treatment or a management, I guess, for children with epilepsy. And it has been looked at for other sort of reasons, such as weight loss reasons, but the research is rather inconclusive. It's not promising around that. When we look at exercise performance and running performance, one thing just to bear in mind is carbs are our body's primary fuel source. It's super important. So keto diet, from my personal perspective, isn't something I would necessarily gravitate towards if I was trying to enhance someone's running performance, because the wealth of research, there's just so much research out there to suggest that carbs fuel the body. They can enhance performance. We've seen that they can enhance performance time and improve running performance times. The intensity of the run will dictate what kind of fuel source you will tap into mostly. So the more intense the run, so the faster the run you're doing, the more likely you will be tapping into more carb reserves. The slower the run, or the less intense, I guess, the longer duration, we may be tapping more into the fat reserves, where the keto diet may be used more commonly. So, with keto, what we have to remember is it's quite a low carb diet, which also means it's a low fiber diet. And fiber is so important for optimal well-being, not just for people who run, it's for general health. So it feeds our gut bacteria to help it flourish and grow. It's our gut bacteria's primary fuel source. And we know that on a keto diet, there's alterations. When you look at individuals, there's changes to their gut microbiota because they're pulling out a lot of that fuel source. And the other thing just to bear in mind is post-run, particularly immediately post-run, refueling with things like carbs helps to blunt the stress response that can be induced by running, which is good for immune function. If we're refueling quickly with the carbs, that is a positive thing. It helps to reduce that stress response and supports with immunity. And lastly, carbs play a role with mood. They help to produce things like the happy hormone serotonin. So if we are really low carb, it could be difficult in terms of a mood perspective, and it's something difficult to sustain long term. I'm not going to go into too much depth with things like periodized carbohydrate training, but that's a new kind of area of research where people intermittently reduce their intake of carbs. But realistically, long term, from what I'm aware of, I don't think there's a huge benefit to going on a super low carb diet. It's difficult to sustain, but everybody's different and they've got to do what works for them.
Yeah, so in summary, it's not something you'd suggest for most runners.
No.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's also really important to remember that most of us are not looking to do 200, 300 mile runs, which is where really high fat, low carb training can come in handy. So you become fat adapted and all this kind of stuff. Most of us aren't doing that, and it's not a very sustainable long-term solution in our everyday lives because we're not elite athletes looking to do these things. We also have families. We also at some point would like to go out for dinner again when we're allowed, and we also need energy for everyday life. So I think cutting out carbohydrates in order to have a sort of 0.5 or 1% increase in improvement over a really, really long race probably won't be worth it for the majority of people.
Yeah. And if you're looking at going down that route, it definitely seek guidance. Do it with a dietitian or a nutritionist. Just if you're looking at that sort of thing and you want to do something along those lines, make sure you get guidance to make sure you're not becoming deficient in certain areas like the fiber. But yeah, you're completely right.
So next question, what I would love to know personally is, what are some of the worst diet habits that you see in your clinic?
I think when it comes to running specifically, probably not fueling for the work required. So, people sometimes get super hung up on things like grams of, obviously sports nutrition is quite technical, but people get very hung up on calories, grams, carbs, protein, grams, and it isn't easy to sustain. So tracking all of that isn't easy to sustain, but often people try and heavily combine weight loss at the same time as trying to enhance their running performance. And the two don't always go in hand, because we need fuel to enhance our performance. We need to fuel our body properly. And probably actually, as you were just discussing, is actually the carbohydrate side of things. I don't often put loads of meal plans together for runners, but when I do, I regularly find it's quite difficult. So if people are looking to compete and they're looking to do a lot longer distances and they're trying to increase their times, and I'm looking at their overall meal plan, it's usually not quite enough carbs. And when I have to put their meal plans together, it can be difficult sometimes to actually get enough into their diet, because there's a lot of volume that comes with it. So it's probably, in a nutshell, not really fueling for the work or the exercise that they're doing, that then has knock-on effects not only to their performance but to other areas of health like immune function, for example.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that. I get asked all the time about wanting to lose weight whilst also running, whilst also wanting to run specifically for performance. And I also don't feel like, from my own personal experience, I also don't feel like the two are compatible, because when I've been at my leanest, I certainly have not had my best running performances. The two for me are kind of mutually exclusive, because if I'm eating to be extremely lean, I am not eating to fuel my runs properly.
Absolutely, yeah. It's difficult, and I think it's a target for quite a few people. But I think if you know sort of the science behind it and you're looking to enhance your performance, you definitely need to feed the body with the right stuff.
Okay, I'm so happy you said that. That makes me really good. Okay, so next question, and one of the last questions. Someone asked recently about potential small boosts, like things like beetroot juice in your training and before a race. Do you have any information about sort of little tweaks that people can make to improve their performance, and whether beetroot juice kind of is all it's cracked up to be?
Yeah, I think things like beetroot juices is certainly exciting. There's lots of research coming out around supplements for sports nutrition. I'd say to begin with, looking at sort of the macros and making sure the diet is good. That's kind of like the first thing we need to tackle. And if there are other tweaks that could be looked at, beetroot juice is definitely worth a try. There is interesting research. I can't remember the exact doses. I think it's something like 70 mils 3 hours beforehand or something along those lines, but don't obviously quote me on that. But there is interesting research to show that it's got nitrates in, which can help with aerobic capacity, potentially improve running time, so worth a try. Caffeine, as you mentioned earlier, is a funny one, because there is research to show that it can enhance sort of mood, potentially running performance and times, but you've got to, if you're taking anything like caffeine before a run, just make sure first of all you're not having too much and that you can tolerate it. And then when it comes to sort of other dietary tweaks, I would say one of the things that, rather than looking say at a boost in performance, I would say an area that people struggle with is immune function and low immunity. So runners often tend to get upper respiratory tract infections just because they're more susceptible to it, depending on the distance you're doing. If you're doing long endurance, high intensity runs, we're at greater risk, which can then dampen our sports performance or our running performance. So just making sure you're looking at things like getting in enough vitamin D. We know that vitamin D is crucial. Low levels have been associated with fatigue, with poor bone health, even things like mood performance, but also immune function. So making sure you're getting in 10 micrograms between October to April. There's been interesting research around probiotics as well for gut function. So if you do struggle with digestive issues, that may be a benefit, but also with immunity. So if you're training throughout winter or you're in the lead up to a race, there's research around taking some probiotics. I think it's about sort of 2 weeks in the lead up to a race or throughout the winter period when you're training, could potentially have benefits on immunity, for example. So ultimately that's going to help with recovery and support with overall performance.
Great, that's so helpful, thank you. And last question, if you could give any advice to the subscribers to this channel with regards to running or diet or both, what would it be?
Oh gosh, okay. Is it just one piece of advice or is it just a couple of?
You can give a couple of pieces if you like.
Okay, so as I was saying earlier, I do think it's easy to get bogged down in the science of nutrition and sports science, because it is all super technical. So you may be reading online that you have to have a specific amount of grams of carbs and protein. That is important to consider. But as you were saying earlier, if you are an elite athlete and you are trying to boost your performance for very specific reasons, that's when that detail really matters. But for most of us, for general runners, really just look at your diet as a whole. And I think you did a great Instagram post yesterday, which I thought was amazing, by listening to your hunger and fullness cues. As a nutritionist myself, I don't necessarily track everything I eat. I don't track all the grams of what I eat. So definitely feel for the work required. If you're really fatigued, your performance is suffering, then look, maybe, are you actually getting enough carbs in your diet? Are you having enough to eat before you go on a run? Are you refueling enough? And that refuel time is important. And one other thing, or two other things: diversity, as we've spoken about, eat the rainbow, lots of antioxidants, so lots of different colors on your plate. And the third thing, just with protein, we didn't really touch on protein, but when it comes to protein, what I would say is spread consumption throughout the day. A lot of us tend to pile our protein into a bolus dose in the evening, or into 2 doses, lunch and dinner. But our bodies utilize and metabolize protein best for muscle tissue repair, recovery, spread throughout the day. So get a bit in at breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you can get it into snacks, even better, but evenly dose your consumption throughout the day.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. I am snack monster, so I think I get in plenty throughout the day. Thank you so much. That was honestly so interesting. I know so many people on here will have found it really valuable and useful, and hopefully taken a lot away from it as well. Could you possibly share your social media handles? Where can people come and find you and look at what you have to say?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram under Lily_Souter, so SOUTTER_nutrition, and I've been doing quite a few running posts recently, and I'll try and do a couple more.
That's great. Thank you so much, and I will speak to you soon.
Thank you, Flora. Speak soon.
Well, I thought that was great. Lily is just filled with so much helpful and useful information. She is honestly a voice of reason on the internet. It's so nice to see kind of evidence-based information, especially when it comes to things like running. You know, it's so important to get our nutrition right. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did enjoy it, please do give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. There's loads more running content coming your way. I have linked Lily's social media handle and channels down below, so you can get in contact with her if you would like. Give her a follow. Just say thank you for the vlog. Please do tag us if you share this on social media, and please do share it. It really helps bring people to the channel, hopefully make them smile a little bit, get motivated to get out running, and stop the spread of misinformation on social media. Comment any questions you might have below, and I will do my best to answer them or get Lily to answer them. I will see you again next week. Bye!